Yuji Itadori, what a terrible fate you've encountered. What's up, guys? That guy with a pencil here. Fun fact, I do mean to have it on me and keep it on me at all times. Generally, fun fact, I have 15 minutes to give you my thoughts generally, but very specifically story-wise, on how I feel about Yuji Itadori. Specifically, in terms of his integration into the narrative of Jujutsu Kaisen Modulo. So, let's not waste any more time, and let's hop right into it. Let me get this 15-minute timer going right now. Where is it? Please. Okay, so, Yuji is in an interesting spot narratively, right? Obviously, there is the whole character side of things, but I'll talk about that in a second. I mainly want to talk about how he's being used narratively. And it's funny, because he's actually kind of, in a roundabout way, haunting the narrative, and not in the same way that Ayuda Kotsu haunted the narrative in main series JJK. When you think about haunting the narrative, it's typically a character who had lasting major impacts on the narrative, but they're in the past 9 out of 10 times, and they aren't like known to be alive or active. Think of a Madara Uchiha haunting the narrative of Naruto. Think of That's a spoiler. I was about to go with like 2 different examples, but both of those are major spoilers. But essentially, think of a character who has had so much impact on the plot, and there's not a non-zero possibility that they appear again later in the plot, but usually that character's like gone, dead, which is why we call it haunting the narrative, as in they've already completed their role in the past, and it was such a big role that ultimately they set the foundation for the narrative as we know it. Yuji Itadori is undeniably a part of that narrative. The reason the Modulo universe exists as it does for the Sumerians to arrive into the Jujutsu world as we know it is because of the efforts of Yuji Itadori. This is established as early as chapter 1. Obviously, Yuji Itadori and Satoru Gojo are given the most credit because Yuji was the main character and also the slayer of Sukuna, even though there were a bunch of other people that helped and laid the foundation as well, but Yuji is very, very important. He starts off in just the generic sense of haunting the narrative, and this gets highlighted and hinted at over and over and over again. The next time we get a mention of Yuji is a whole 5 chapters later in chapter 6, where Takada, it feels weird calling it like an early series antagonist, but JJK Modulo is a short run series, so I suppose early series antagonist Takada recalls an encounter with this very same Yuji Itadori, presumably when he was much, much younger. Once again, sort of allowing Yuji to haunt the narrative. But then it quickly gets established that Yuji's alive. Like alive and well. To the point where upon the whole conflict between the Sumerians and humanity coming up, he's kind of the grade A option. So he goes from a strange haunting the narrative kind of thing to, oh, he's haunting it in the sense that he laid the foundation for the plot, but he also has a very clear precedent to actually become a part of the plot at any moment. So it goes from sort of haunting the narrative to just being in the background. However, unlike other background characters who are kind of, just there to fill space, Yuji Itadori isn't just there to fill space, he's there to essentially act as a mediator, despite not actually being there, which is a very interesting position to put a previous main character. The same thing is sort of set up with Yuta, except we actually knew where Yuta was from the start of JJK 0, well, not JJK 0, at the end of JJK 0, we know he went to Africa, and he consistently gets mentioned until his return in main series JJK. And notably, everyone knows where he is. We even know where he is, up until the point where he actually gets reunited with our main cast, including Yuji Itadori. But, in terms of the narrative, the best idea we have of where Yuji is in Japan, I guess. Even with other characters acknowledging that they do know of, and are still alive, and are seemingly enough were in contact with Yuji, such as Kugisaki Nobara, he's just gone now. He's not really reachable. In fact, he said he wouldn't be going to any more funerals. We also find out here, get a hard confirmation that old man Yuji is never going to be a thing, because it literally can't be a thing. He's ageless and basically immortal now. And that means he's still presumably stuck in that same, 15, 16-year-old body he had all the way back in main series JJK. This has led to a whole bevy of power scaling discussions that I'm going to keep on the sideline for now, despite that also being a major part of Yuji's current role within Jujutsu Kaisen Modulo. But this has led Yuji is an interesting spot as well, because that means he has basically no connections to any of our, current main characters, including characters such as Dabura, and especially including a character like Yuka Kotsu. We have no idea what his dynamic was with any of them We have no idea when he saw Hana and Nobara. Presumably, he saw Hana's body, but still, we have no idea what time that was. Does he even know Yuka? Does he know Tsurugi? Does he know anything that's going on right now? He goes from a character who haunted the narrative to a character who's in the background of the narrative to a character who not just haunted the narrative, is in the background of the narrative, but now he's in the background while seemingly having minimal context of what's actually going on, which only makes his integration all the stranger, I won't lie to you. Because now, he feels super, giga disconnected from the plot as a whole. Maru versus Tsurugi is going on. We have Dabura versus, Big Raga. Two fights that could definitely do well for Yuji intervention, considering how both are going and what they mean for the general state of the narrative, but does Yuji have any idea what's going on? Like, don't get me wrong, it's very likely he probably does at least have a general sense of what's going on around here, considering, it's Dabura and Maharaga, two extremely powerful characters with a whole lot of curse energy, so he probably senses it. I don't see a curtain up anywhere, and everyone already knows about curse energy anyway, so Yuji, if he's in Japan, probably senses it, but like, is he gonna get there in time? Does he care? Because that's what the most interesting part of the latest chapter is for Yuji's general role in the narrative. In the official Viz translation, what Yuji says in response to Iori Akotsu, in terms of Iori's worries about the strength of the current generation, is that it doesn't matter. But apparently, at least according to everyone in the comments, and I greatly appreciate for this, not just for informing me of Iori's name, but also of what Yuji could have said in the original text, he said, I don't care. Now, this has led to a very interesting position. Obviously, ever since we found out that Yuji is alive and well and youthful, and still in his prime, presumably, obviously probably not a physical prime, because if he hasn't aged, he's still being like a 60-year-old body, and typically you don't hit your physical prime to around like late 20s, early 30s. But regardless, he's presumably the same Yuji from the end of JJK at a low end and possibly massively stronger. He could have so much influence on the plot, and he could have had so much influence on the Jujutsu world itself. He should realistically be the foundation of it. Sure, you can still have your clan heads here or there. Or like clan heads duo, as in probably whatever happened to the Zenin clan, with Megami and Maki being the only two members, except Maki got subsumed into the Gojo clan, because Yuta got subsumed into the Gojo clan. So like, there could be the Gojo clan, and like, old heads, and then Yuji. But clearly, he's disconnected entirely. And especially in the original text, him saying, I don't care, rings weird. Specifically to the Yuji we ended JJK with, right? Remember, at the end of JJK, Yuji was determined to essentially live on Gojo's legacy, complete his dream, make sure that the next generation that exists could take care of the generation after that, and raise them up to be strong as a collective, and so on, and so on, and so on. And initially, when I first found out that Yuji, kind of dipped, and said, we ball, bruh, I don't really want to do this anymore, this sucks, I was a little bit disappointed. I was like, huh? Character assassination of doom and despair. However, once again, I do have to thank everyone in the comments of this review in particular for enlightening me to the idea that, yeah, Yuji was a whole 15 and or 16. I should have looked that up. 15 and or 16 at the time he made that promise. He likely didn't even realize that he wasn't aging at that point, as he had, what, less than a year interaction with the one other person in his exact same scenario? He likely hadn't seen funeral after funeral after funeral. He likely hadn't been too late to save person after person after person. He likely hadn't suffered even more, considering how much suffering he had gone through in the original Jujutsu Kaisen. So even with these calamitous battles that will decide the fate of the entire world coming at the cost of the future, such as Yuka Kotsu, a future in a way such as Dabura Karuba, and the conflict between humanity and submarines as a whole, yeah, Yuji's lack of involvement in it all, it makes sense for a boy who never got to grow up. A boy trapped in an immortal body, alone, watching as everyone around him slowly but surely ages and dies. A boy steeped in the world of Jujutsu and seeing no matter what he does, no matter how many people he helps, no matter how many times he tries to bring people down the right path, there's still those who walk down the path of darkness. Takeda encountered Yuji. Yuji let him escape. But Takeda didn't change. He went on and just got worse and worse and worse. Now put yourself in Yuji's shoes. Can you imagine how that would feel? The isolation. The strength that you have not allowing you to connect with anybody. The immortality that you have locking you in a body that will never change as everything, including the very world, changes around you. It's a terrible fate. But ultimately, that's why I find it so interesting. And very specifically, Chapter 17 opened my eyes to a different direction, especially upon hearing about the initial original translations. Or not original translations, but the original text. Iori was well, I'm not sure how old he was at the time of this, but presumably was a young man worried about the strength of the next generation. He was worried about his own generation's failing strength. He, if anything, was kind of like Gojo. Worried that he and his collective were not strong enough. So when Yuji met him, especially at this point, presumably well before the deaths of many of his friends, and probably deep in the mire of that role as the endless immortal protector, when Yuji says, "I don't care," or "it doesn't matter," you could read that as two things. It doesn't matter, because Yuji Itadori has been entirely consumed by the cycle of curses, and believes that ultimately no single man can change it, no collective can change it, so why should he care? And or, it still is the idea that Yuji Itadori is taking that burden upon his shoulders. He says it doesn't matter how weak your generation is, or the generation after that, or the generation after that. I don't care how weak you are, how weak your kids are, how weak the world is, because I will be here eternally. Humanity will be here eternally. Curses will be here eternally. And Yuji Itadori, who stands at the perfect balance between both, will sort of act as a mediator, a balancer, but just not by anyone else's will. They say they need to find Yuji Itadori. It seems to be something they're desperate to do, but Yuji Itadori isn't a being that necessarily needs to be found. I think Yuji is very, very aware of what's happening in the remains of Shinjuku. He likely senses Dabura and Mahoraga fighting. At the same time, he will most certainly probably sense, if he didn't already, sense the reality warper over here in Maru, or at least the reality shaper. He'll probably definitely sense the overwhelming cursed energy of Riko Orimoto's husk reanimated again. So now Yuji Itadori is left with a choice. And of course, we're left to interpret what his choice will be. It doesn't matter how bad things are. It doesn't matter what conflict there is. It doesn't matter how weak everyone is, because Yuji Itadori is there. And what he decides to do with that strength is all up to himself. So, he can appear and be the great big bad savior that we could use in either of these two battles, to either save one half of the future in Yuka Okotsu, or the other half in Tsurugi, and technically, Maru and the Samurians themselves. Or, he could not interfere. And I think that's the most interesting position to leave a character like Yuji in. For a character who at first was haunting the narrative, then became a background element, that seemingly could not care about the active foreground elements of the narrative, leaving him in this choice, or in this place where he stands perfectly balanced in between two sides, literally in a actual sense being a balance between a human and a curse, thanks to the consumption of his brothers and transcending his humanity, at the same time being bound by it, and also being stuck between a rock and a hard place. Like I said, Yuji likely felt despair over the fact that he literally couldn't be everywhere at once. Not even Satoru Gojo, who had the capacity to literally bend the world to his whim, could be everywhere at once. No matter how strong you think Yuji Itadori is, he doesn't have the limitless. Even the one who did, and the strongest who ever possessed it, couldn't be everywhere at once. So now Yuji Itadori is left in an interesting spot. He's left with a choice. What does he interfere with? Does he interfere at all? Does he engage at all? Yuji Itadori is now in the same position that a Satoru Gojo, that a Ryomen Sukuna, that a Kashimo Hajime, that a Toji Fushiguro, that a Ryu Ishiguro, that they all were in. The strongest, presumably undeniably of their respective eras and of their respective peoples. Just as Dabura Karaba is. And just as Dabura Karaba has done, Yuji can stake his life. He can stake his position. He can put his power behind whoever he wishes, whenever he wishes. And Yuji Itadori has no obligation to anyone, because who can force the strongest to have obligations to anyone but themselves? That's a really interesting position to take a character who was so deeply steeped in the idea of being that savior, being the next Satoru Gojo, living up to an ideal that ultimately I bet he even believed he would not manage to meet through the nature and the passage of life, but here he finds himself unable to ever reach death. It's a very interesting position for Yuji Itadori to be in. And unlike those of the strongest archetype before him, I don't think he's going to reach absolution through death. I think he's going to find a purpose, one way or another, as he walks around the world seemingly aimless. But at the same time, if he never even appears, I'd be perfectly fine with that too. Because Yuji Itadori is a character of complexities. And even though he hasn't appeared properly once in terms of the modern narrative of Jujutsu Kaisen Modulo, I'm more than ever excited to see what he decides to do or not do. But, of course, I literally went over time, so I want to thank you so much for watching. Please remember to leave a like, share, comment, and subscribe. And if you made it all the way to the end of this video, please do me a favor and leave the curse of humanity. That feels appropriate for Yuji. Leave the curse of humanity in the comment section down below. And leave any thoughts. Do you guys agree with my interpretation of Yuji? That he can kind of, sort of be whatever he wants, considering he shifted so many narrative roles? Do you think he sort of fits into one singular narrative role? Do you think that he will intervene in the Dabura fight? Do you think he'll intervene in the Maru and Tsurugi fight? Do you think he won't intervene at all? And of course, you still have Mahito, who I didn't even touch on at all in this video, who also sells interesting anime, but that's why I only have 15 minutes. But like I said, if you made all the way in this video, please remember to leave a like, share, comment, and subscribe. Make sure to hit that little notification bell so you not miss out on any videos that come to the channel. Also, even to have a Patreon below where you can support me for as low as $1 a month. Healing exclusive videos, early content, and more. You can also now become a member to the channel for as low as $3 a month to get the same perks and more. Some of those perks include the live reactions to every other series I happen to review, including Jujutsu Kaisen Modulo. You can get all live reactions to the JJK Modulo up to this point, and all ones that happen in the future. On top of that, you get early ad-free access to all videos on here, the main channel, on the second channel, that got the reaction, which drops 2-hour long or 45-minute long or somewhere in between reaction videos every Saturday at 1 p.m. EST. You get early ad-free access to all of those. And on top of that, I do have my Twitch link in the description down below. That guy with the controller. We chat, we have a fun old time over there every Friday at 8 p.m. EST and whenever else I can, but for real, it's just Friday at 8 p.m. EST. And on top of that, I do my Ko-Fi link down below if you want to drop 5 beans or a short video, 20 beans or a long video, or any beans at all. Any support is always greatly appreciated. Now, I'd like to thank you so much for watching once again, and I hope you guys have a wonderful day. This is that guy with the pencil, writing off. I'd like to give a thank you to our sketch tier members: Eternal Flame, Red Wolf 4765, Astro, Glacier XZ, Zera, J2MA, Guillaume, Pura Ura, Enzo, Yuki Ally, Grim, Ollie, The Boy, Corey Watson, Damon Brown, Magic, CCC, Romano Fiore, Dino, Hector Gonzalez, Tim Thomas, Kaving, Julian Perez, RXN, Nevi97, Logan Guzman, Dead Meme, Karu Deer, Christian Carter, Keon Stewart, Donovan McIntosh, Sino King, Hamza Idrisi, BNA DNA, Edwin Igbinoba, Straw, Athenzi Shear, Antavius Mitchell, Azo2404, Superflame Zero, Weary Exile, Karina Hernandez, Sheesh King, Window Life, Alex Kenny, Victor Jacobs, Todd, Dre, Axis XC, The Practical One, Aswin Hedi Presetia, JMD KD, Devi Pesiet, Landon Clapwick, Heath Nelson, CAET, Funny Dude, Jagoda, Plant Crone, Striker Man, Brandon Payne, Black Sage, and Multi-Batman Superman. Then I'll leave a thank you to Artline Art Tier patrons: A+A, Kevin Encarnacion, Sean, Dread Zoen, Midnight Lord 21, CJ, and Karina Hernandez. Then I'll leave a thank you to our Ink Tier members: King RTX, Shrimpo the 4th Shrimp 06, and Zom. Then I'd like to give a thank you to our digital art tier members: J Warrior and AZ Void. And I'd like to give a final thank you to our colored art tier patrons: Walking Munoz and Walking Munoz.